The dawn of civilization. Primitive. Dangerous. Exciting. The handwriting is on the wall. If the human race is ever going to amount to anything, it needs
the most civilized caveman I have ever seen.
Look who's come out of his cave.
Hey everyone, this is James from Cave Dweller Music. I am flying solo today. Brendan is not here, but I do have Shelley from Hate Meditations and Jason, aka Lonegoat. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate you taking the time. It's going to be great talking with you.
Chime in, but thanks for having us. It's an invasion from Necropolis happening today. So Necropolis is a podcast that Shelley and I co-host together, and we've been doing it for about 2 years now, over 2 years, I would say, and lots of interesting conversations and guests, and it's helped broaden my own understanding of extreme music by doing the podcast, by having so many discussions with so many different individuals from all walks of life. So it's great to actually cross paths here and kind of have two different music podcasts kind of converging together in one discussion. Go ahead, Shelley.
I think you said it all, really. I was just going to say, thanks very much for having us on. Looking forward to chatting.
Awesome. Shelley, for anyone who's not sort of familiar with your site, what is sort of like the core ethos of Hate Meditations? What is the focus of the website?
Painfully pedantic, but honest reviews. I started out back in 2017 just as a way to organize some thoughts, really informal, didn't really think about any other sort of getting a readership. Just general essays on various trends I'd noticed in metal, various ideas that I have, focusing on extreme metal, particularly black metal, because that's my forte. Then I started sort of doing historical reviews of classic releases, normally taking two albums from a similar era and style and sort of comparing and contrasting them to see their different interpretations of a particular style. And that was a series of articles that built up a little bit of momentum. And then about 2019, I started diving into the hectic world of reviewing new albums. I said when I started out I didn't want to do that because keeping on top of new releases can be a bit daunting at times. And as it's kind of grown from there, I do sort of try and keep up a regular churn of new reviews. And it's more just what I imagine I would like to read from other reviewers. There's lots of great metal writing out there at the moment, but it was really me just trying to raise the standard of some discourse on metal, because I thought that some of it was too superficial, didn't really go deep enough, and also wasn't honest enough at times. I think there's nothing wrong with being critical when you're coming from a place of being constructive about it.
Yes.
Not that I always meet my own standards, but yeah. And since then, I've just kind of churned out more random essays and just kept up with new releases and stuff. And that's how Hate Meditations got started and how it's grown over the last few years.
Awesome. Love to see that. And then you formed a partnership, obviously, with Jason's blog. How did that partnership come to be?
It was during the pandemic. So my rate of writing new articles obviously increased exponentially during that time, because we didn't have anything to do. And Jason just stumbled across my blog. I think it was, again, as it tends to happen on sort of underground metal circles, it was like a friend of a friend of a friend shared a link, or I might have reviewed a band that was friends with Jason. And at this time, Jason was thinking about starting his own podcast again, as a way to sort of reconnect with friends across the scene, because obviously no one could go anywhere. And he had me on as a guest in one of the very early episodes, just as he was sort of finding his feet as a podcaster. And we got on so well that I basically became an informal co-host, slightly more formal now. We've basically been chatting ever since, both online and offline. He came to the UK last year and we got smashed for about a week. But that's when we formalized the Necropolis partnership as well.
Very nice. And I know that you've done some YouTube video stuff, some stuff that's specifically YouTube based, that's sort of investigative or looking at trends or history. What's the focus of those episodes?
it's still a work in progress because I'm not sort of adept at the skills that you need to be a YouTuber. The sort of the video editing, the technical side of it so much. So initially, I just created the YouTube channel to upload new episodes of Necropolis, but I thought I could maybe grow the platform out a little bit and sort of expand on some of the things that I do on Hate Meditations, because although I love writing and I love the written word as like a medium for communicating, especially about music, I kind of wanted to create a more informal kind of forum for analysis, but also just be a bit silly at times. And it was really just me kind of splurging my ideas into the camera on like classic metal albums and where they fit within like the hierarchy and the history of metal. And, occasionally being deliberately antagonistic, deliberately trying to sort of prod various kind of sacred cows that metal kind of has about itself. And yeah, just really sort of create a different angle on a lot of that. And I think, obviously with the visual medium, you get a bit more space to be creative, whereas with writing, obviously you can be very creative with writing, but you're sort of limited to what you can do with a wall of text. And it's not for everybody. Some people prefer like the visual medium. So yeah, it's kind of, as I said, it's kind of taken a bit of a hiatus at the moment because I'm a new father. So I'm sort of juggling obviously that with a full-time job and trying to keep up with reviews. So I haven't really had a chance to build on that, but I'm hoping to sort of get through the history of heavy metal. I've kind of hit about 1980 at this point, and I'm sort of introducing punk as part of the equation, but I'm hoping to get onto sort of the classic early 80s albums by that point and just really, really poke the bear as far as like having some provocative opinions about some of those albums. But yeah.
Yeah, you're going to be kicking the hornet's nest in that area.
Yeah, basically.
And Jason, your podcast, do you want to tell us a little bit about Necropolis and how that came to be?
So it was born from quarantine, from COVID-19, as so many other things were. So with that, I just figured I saw a lot of other people doing podcasts, and I'm like, well, I know a shit ton of people. It's like I could, interview all these different people and see what they're all about, and amplify them to an audience. So I went ahead and I started. I would say like the first 10, I was still getting used to podcasting. 10 episodes. I think Shelley, I had interviewed Shelley for the 5th episode because of how prolific he was on the Hate Meditations, and we're both children of the anus. So anus knows anus. We really, hit it off on his episode. We started just going like this nonstop. I'm like, well, this guy would be, a great co-host. And as a guest, he was a guest co-host for a while. And then I was like, why don't you just, be part of the podcast moving forward? And then, pretty much sealed the deal when I went to England last year and hung out with them, and just to ensure that, moving forward, this good, healthy relationship that we have, and we know where each other stand in regard to, the podcast and all that. So, we're on the same page. I will say there have been some interesting episodes. We've been doing they're not necessarily roundtables, because we tried doing roundtables early on, and the listenership on some of those roundtables never got above 100 listens. And that's cross-platform. That's with Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, and all that. But once we started doing like the focus episodes, which is essentially a roundtable, but on one specific topic. So we do like a deep dive on, like last one we did was on Norwegian black metal. And I know all the guys really enjoyed chatting about that. And I found that if it's a focus episode, it tends to do a lot better with the listenership. So it's still not, a huge podcast or anything. It's average, 200 to 400 listens per episode, which is better than some, but, obviously there's way bigger podcasts out there.
Right.
But we definitely have a large enough audience to keep going, in my opinion. And we're open to all kinds of different things. So I know we had Boyd Rice on, and even though Boyd Rice isn't metal or classical, we had him on, and him and Shelley clashed, and it was really entertaining. Like Boyd Rice wrote a critique on Instagram. He later deleted it, by the way. But he wasn't too thrilled with his encounter with Shelley.
I've never been more proud. He described me as a doctrinaire Marxist. That was a real proud moment for me. But yeah, I think as well, just to add to what you were saying, Jason, although the listenership is small, and this is going to sound a little bit pretentious, but I think people come to us for a slightly deeper dive, a slightly more analytical or in-depth chat. So like the band focuses we've done sort of Bathory, Morbid Angel, Mayhem and Slayer, sort of the bands with rich histories that you can really sort of sink your teeth into. And there's about 4 or 5 of us that will kind of get into that. So, there's plenty of podcasts out there that will do, some casual chat and a roundup of like recent releases that people have been digging and maybe a couple of interviews or whatever. And, that's a great format that has its place. But for us, we do interviews, but they tend to be much more like in depth, and you probably need to be into whichever artist you're interviewing to sort of get anything from it. But yeah, when we do a roundtable chat about an artist that everyone knows really well, I think it does resonate because it gets under the skin of that artist, and we all have a different kind of perspective and a different angle, and don't always agree, but we always have a good kind of cordial discussion about it. And I think that has its place within kind of the metal podcast kind of little corner of the internet.
Definitely. And I think the thing is, like, you're getting a response from people, whether they support or are against what you're saying. But either way, there's some sort of emotional buy-in, which is always going to have an audience that sticks with you and comes back for more. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's those levels of disagreement that actually kind of chime with people more. If we were all just sitting around saying, yeah, this band is awesome or whatever, it wouldn't be very entertaining. But sometimes, particularly Jason and I, will have a different take on a particular album or a particular era of a band, and then it's quite interesting to see how the discussion unfolds, because it's not just a sort of surface level kind of celebration of a particular artist, although we do lavish praise on bands like Morbid Angel or whatever, because for obvious reasons. But yeah, there are sort of corners where we'll have a little sort of tangent and just not come to blows, but have quite a heated disagreement on something. But I think that's kind of where it sort of sometimes differs from other podcasts.
Right. And I think something that you don't even take into account when you do stuff like that is you're going to get what I call them hate shares. So you have people that would like hear your opinion and be like, send it to their friend immediately and be like, check out what this asshole's saying about like, and then they'll share into some of those, and you have this whole chain of new listeners, and they're angry at you, but they're actually boosting your numbers.
Well, this is so on the non-podcast side of my YouTube channel, where it is just me yelling at the camera about different bands. The video that got the most hits was me basically saying that Mayhem weren't all that important as musically as far as black metal is concerned, and I make the point that like Euronymous was far better as like an organizer and administrator of the Norwegian scene than he was a musician compared to his peers. And obviously, like, I did like a clickbaity title and was a little bit dismissive with my language in the video. I kind of played into what you're supposed to do with generating clicks or whatever, but it did suddenly spike in viewers and comments of everyone just saying, you don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, it's just, I didn't want that kind of, hate share or whatever, but yeah, that seems to be what I generated by accident. So
I call that the metal sucks approach.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's like 80% of their articles.
Yeah, we also did 2 episodes of slaughtering sacred cows. We'll probably do a third one. So it's like overrated bands that we just wanted to kind of chime in on why, they're essentially cows ready for the slaughter. And those have been really fun, and they did have a good reception with the listenership. And James, like you were saying, it's like, I could definitely see, Cannibal Corpse, for instance. I think they were brought up one time, and it'd be funny if like they heard it and passed it on to their friends, like, "Oh, these guys are trashing Cannibal Corpse," stuff like that.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Get those hate.
But again, the approach we took wasn't just like, bitching or shitting on them. We took a constructive approach, saying, like, for instance, I did the clickbait thing where one of my picks was Dark Throne, and I absolutely adore Dark Throne. They've released some of my favorite all-time albums. but I was more just commenting on kind of the ongoing legacy of Dark Throne and the reputation of them. So we have like a more constructive discussion. It's not just us ranting about bands that everyone loves for the sake of like generating views. And again, obviously the title is Slaughtering Sacred Cows and the fact that I put a big picture of Dark Throne on the YouTube thumbnail. Yes, we are kind of prodding that, being that provocative, but at the same time, when you actually click into the episode, we do have, quite a sort of reasoned discussion on some of these artists, and some of their legacies are conflicted. There's good and bad things about some of these bands that have been around for a few years. So,
valid reasons to kind of dethrone them, essentially. So, we don't just go in there just to throw shade at bands. We usually have a reason for to slaughter the sacred cow. So it's not malicious, and at the core of it's not malicious, but on the exterior it might be, because we are going for the hate listens essentially. It's like I hate this band too, and now these guys are giving me more reasons to hate this band. So there's plenty of that out there, and Jerry from Scale It Back, that's pretty much what he specializes in, is just this hate listens. So it can be effective for reaching a larger demographic, but still, it's like if everything's 100% negative, then you're kind of missing the mark, and probably shouldn't be, just continuously posting, negative, and they're not talking about the good qualities of the music as well. So we try to take a more nuanced approach when we do throw some shade at some bands.
Just to clarify, I'm not sure if everyone will be familiar with Jerry from Scale It Back, but basically if you search in YouTube for Blood Incantation Sucks, then you can cross a half-hour video of him dissecting a Blood Incantation song and why it sucks. That's kind of the approach that we're talking about, that we don't necessarily want to do. But
that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
And then, Shelley, I'm going to ask you this first because, Jason, I know your answer, but I'll get yours next. Are you in any bands of any kind?
I was in a band. I'm sort of on a hiatus at the moment, but not a metal band. I play keyboards, but I play in a gothic rock band, which is my other sort of non-metal passion. Aside from various bits of classical and ambient music, and quite a lot of heavy rock as well. Gothic rock is kind of like the scene that I moved in most in the UK in terms of sort of gigs and clubbing and stuff. I sort of orbited goth scene far more than I orbited the metal scene, even though I'm chiefly a metal fan. So I play keyboards in a gothic rock band, who are just sort of a local band. We play sort of support slots and pub gigs and stuff, trying to sort of get more national attention at the moment.
What's the name of the band?
We're called Dawn of Elysium. They came up with that name before I joined, but it's essentially an amalgamation of two Fields of the Nephilim albums, Dawn Razor and Elysium.
Cool.
And if I had joined when they were still making the name, I would have come up with something different, but it stuck and it's on flyers, and by that point it was too late to change, and it's 10 years later and we're still called Dawn of Elysium. So
it's done.
It's done, yeah.
And then, Jason, I know you're in a couple of different things, or have been over the years. What are you currently playing in?
That's a good question. I'm at like a crossroads right now where on one side, because I do love classical music a lot, and I'm not saying metal and classical are separate. I don't view one as inherently better than the other, because there's just musical forms of expression. But I joined a classical music cult, as David Hurwitz would say, with the Bruckner Society of America, and I've been attending their functions. And it's great to be around so many musicologists and college professors, and really talk about the music of Bruckner, as well as other composers, really in depth, and things that I haven't discovered on my own that they're able to elaborate on, and so there's a classical music side where I want to make my own music more sophisticated, but there's also kind of like the metal and abrasive and dissonant side of my endeavors. But Goatcraft had essentially wrapped up. It was a 5 album concept where um, I had the first album was called All for Naught, starts with an A. Second album starts with a B, etc. And it spells out Abyss. So there was a 5 album concept. Um, and with that, it's like I'm thinking in the future what I'll probably do with Goatcraft, and I probably should change the name honestly, but is to record on my acoustic grand piano and really focus on composition a lot more, because the Goatcraft, I think only a few of those pieces would hold up under like true scrutiny. Because I would say I went into a very feral and the song constructions and all that. I mean, I do conform to Western harmony and all that, but I would say it's in between like soundtrack music and, like classical music or, sophisticated music. It's in between, and I want to push it more to the sophisticated side. So there's that. I'm still at the crossroads of Goatcraft, and then there's the gnome stuff, which started as a joke and still remains as a joke. But I do have fun doing it. Fanning the flames of the nerddom of Dungeon Synth, and yeah, it's been really fun doing that. Just release after release, not really giving a fuck about what people think about it, and the music's very simplistic compared to the Goatcraft. But what I do in the Garden Gnome is I do put a lot more emphasis on modulating. So especially the last 3 or 4 Garden Gnomes, there's a lot more modulating going on, and so in that aspect, I am learning a little bit more about modulating, but shifting from one key to another. The Garden Gnome started as a joke during the pandemic, where I saw like there was hot dog synth and various other kinds of really idiotic, I would say idiotic types of dungeon synth, and the bar was really, really low with the dungeon synth. So I decided, screw it, I'll just create a little silly fucking dungeon synth project, and immediately it came to me. It's like, why don't you call it Garden Gnome? Because I had always kind of viewed the music of summoning as a little gnomish, so I immediately went to the Garden Gnome, and I came out with true Norwegian dungeon synth, and that actually performed really well. I actually sent that to Mortis as well. He never responded; he left me on scene. But I just kept churning out the Garden Gnomes, just recording it right on the spot. Record like 11 tracks in one day. I know it's really shitty practice to do, but I was having fun with it, and it was a lot of humor injected in it. So I would say once I started using the MIDI drums, that's when the project got a little bit more sophisticated, but it's still really lowbrow cave dweller stuff. So yeah, and there's been a lot of tomfoolery.
I love the level of detail that you go into with the lore on each album as well. I think that's a big part of why people enjoy it.
Yeah, I started doing that with the more recent releases, because I know like some dude came up with a list of what makes Dungeon Synth, and one of the aspects is lore. So I started doing little write-ups and all that, and I think it started with Norwegian Soviet Socialist Republics, the one with the hammer and sickle on the cover with the gnome.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that one spread like wildfire. Of course, it's and really funny stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it. This Garden Gnome it could be better if I spent more time on it, and I know some people, they kind of shake their heads like, well, you could have made this better, put in more effort, more work, make it something that you're truly proud of. But I'm proud of it. Like, I just have fun with it, and it's the process that I'm really enjoying. So whether it rots, obscurity, I don't really care. But yeah, that's
the thing I love about this is talking about Goatcraft, or even just seeing Jason play piano. Like, he's a virtuoso piano player. Like he's classically like adept, and you can hear that on Goatcraft, but also you see it whenever Jason posts a video of him playing piano. And then you have this Dungeon Synth project that started as a joke, sort of slash meme, but it's been going on again, since 2020. And as you mentioned, like the lore keeps expanding, keep branching out into different aspects of like fantasy or politics or philosophy. Like the latest one is centered around Hegel and stuff. And it's like, because Jason's from Texas and I'm from Leeds, I'm not quite sure if he's joking or not. When he takes it this far, it's like, has the joke stopped and it started becoming a sincere project or not? Or is it just a joke that's like really, really, really well played out? But people pay money for it. People, pay for the downloads on Bandcamp. It's got like coming out on cassette. I just love that it's been taken this far, and it looks like a genuine Dungeon Synth project at this point, and it's as good as some of the new Dungeon Synth projects. So
yeah, I found out a lot of the people in Dungeon Synth bands, they don't actually know how to play an instrument. It's all just clicking with their mouse and Audacity or whatever, and and so it's not really true like musical backing to their projects. And so what I do is, I have keyboards, so I have a Korg Triton and a Korg Kronos. I record straight from the keyboards, but I use a metronome to throw the drums in afterwards. But it's all coming straight from my keyboards. The only time I've ever messed with like MIDI music was on that split Goatcraft with the Plutonian Shore. That was just my first experience with the MIDI sounds, and I thought it was a really tedious project. It's like I could have made the music on keyboard so much faster than I had like a MIDI keyboard too, but just trying to clean it up and getting the sounds the way I wanted them to sound, it was very tedious. So I prefer to actually just whip out a keyboard and play on it.
Right. Yeah, I think it sort of gives the music a different sort of feel to it. Like I don't know, it plays out. You can tell when someone's done it that way.
Yeah, I guess so. But MIDI can sound really convincing. I know, like even with notation software, they can do like plugins, and there's like a Berliner Philharmoniker plugin where the orchestras sound very real, and so there is a very convincing sound coming from MIDI nowadays. 20 years ago, anyone could tell if it was MIDI, but nowadays it's really blurring the lines. But I definitely prefer to physically use my fingers to create music rather than pointing, with a mouse and clicking and moving things around. So that's my preference. But the Dungeon Synth, there's a great deal of those guys who don't really know how to play music, but they're really adept at organizing MIDI files and dumping stuff and organizing, cutting and pasting and all that. So
okay, so I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent into Dungeon Synth, but this is one of the reasons why I find it fascinating, because that's what people used to say about punk rock, is that it was almost like a rebellion against 70s progressive music because that was becoming too technical and too esoteric. So it's like, let's bring it back to basics. You don't need to know how to play guitar. You just need to learn a couple of chords. Everything's in 4/4, whatever. Plug in and go. And the thing I love about Dungeon Synth, from a sort of philosophical point of view rather than necessarily a musical one, is just it is very DIY. It's very kind of anyone with a broadband connection and a laptop can start a Dungeon Synth project in theory. And I really like that democratic aspect to it, in that it's the ratio of listeners to creators is very, very high as well, in that everyone's got a Dungeon Synth project if you're in that scene.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting, but I'm not sure why yet. I have an angle that I want to tease out there, but yeah.
I do like how decentralized it is. So there's there's some quote unquote Dungeon Synth labels. I know the Hegel Gnome is coming out on cassette next month. So there's that, but it's still really decentralized. Like it's just, people posting their music online. And granted, there's a very short shelf life with this as well. Like, I noticed with the garden now, I still get listens every day, but when I come off a new release, it will definitely spike hugely. It'll spike, and then after a week or so, it's back to the normal 5 to 20 listens a day. Nothing too crazy, but that's just on the Bandcamp. But I like how decentralized it all is, and I wish metal would take a similar route as that. But metal, I think there's still a lot of rock music in metal, on the surface level side, where there's bands like there are rock, and there's labels and all that, where I wish it was more of like a DIY, decentralized, and little different factions would emerge, like there is in Dungeon Synth. So it's one redeeming quality I view is like Dungeon Synth definitely has like an anarchist type of mentality, where it is very decentralized. There is no formal government or governing body such as record labels and
I mean,
PR companies and all that.
metal's very hierarchy focused as well. Like everyone's making their top 10, top 20, top 50 lists every day, and there'll be a churn of like the same group of artists within that, in that everyone agrees on certain classics, and then there's ones that are kind of in dispute. Sometimes ones are included or whatever, but there's none of that in Dungeon Synth. I know that it's not been around as long, but also there's just none of that agreed canon of what are the classics that you should listen to, outside of like Mortis and a few others. Whereas metal, in fact, more than other contemporary forms of music, is so fixated on hierarchy, I think.
Yeah.
And I've been just as guilty as this as any other like guy on the internet in the scene, but it's very focused on the top four, the big four, big three, the top 15 of black metal, whatever. And yeah, I think it does need to move past that a little bit, and take a leaf out of Dungeon Synth's book as far as how it's kind of structured.
Well, that's kind of
Do you
how
think
Norwegian
that's
black metal started. That was a rejection of the order of death metal. And granted, they did have record labels, and they gained a lot of public attention, but still, it just started as a little cell of really fanatical individuals, and I think that can happen
Yeah, but now
again.
they're deified as the best of that form, in that they are now part of a hierarchy. Not that they wanted it was imposed on them, but yeah.
What I'm saying is that could happen again if it's decentralized, and different little cells of expression are out there, whether it's local or it could be like I know there's different groups on Facebook and all that, where there are different types of niches out there, so people are able to share their commonalities with each other, away from the marketing and the big, record labels and all that. I view that true honest expression really needs to, a lot of time to reflect and reflect away from the spotlight. And that's that's good about Dungeon Synth. I wish the quality was better in Dungeon Synth, but like if metal had the same type of organization or deorganization or whatever as Dungeon Synth has, there could be some really interesting things developing that, everything's coming from left field all of a sudden. So that's what I would view as the ideal state for um, how metal should be with the musicians and the bands and all that. It should be a lot of self-reflection away from the spotlight. That way they're able to refine their own expressions away from what is expected of them. And extreme metal, there's like the hierarchy, as Shelley was saying, so you're expected to be like the hierarchy essentially. And I view that we need to move away from that. Those legacy bands have been doing the same shit for fucking 30 years. It's time to really focus on our own, personal expressions, and, not what other people expect of us. And decentralizing, metal in that aspect, I think would be more positive than negative.
Well, question for you. I mean, two questions, I guess. First one I'll say is going to be, do you think it's damaging to bands to constantly be compared back to these classic artists? So, like, do you think a new band that's starting out, this fact that they release their first song, right? Someone listens to it from a music review site, and immediately they get said, "Wow, you sound like this band, this band, this band, or this band from this classic thing." Do you think that's harmful or helpful?
I would
Mixed
say
feelings.
as descriptions, for reviewers, it's definitely helpful. That way there's something that's like that expression already out there. Therefore, that's why you're dropping that into the conversation. But I view like there's so many different ways we could approach extreme metal. Granted, there's all the different subgenres, and I think that can be expounded on way more than what currently exists. But I don't think the model would result in commercial success as it was in like the 80s and 90s. I think the glory days of mainstream consciousness of extreme metal is definitely past us. But yeah, I don't view it as inherently bad, but when something is so much like something else, it's like, why bother? It's not really
Yeah,
authentic.
I tend to agree because as someone that reviews a lot of music, I do find it useful, but
Right.
I've tried to move away from comparing newer artists to particular bands, like, oh, they sound like Entombed,
Me
they
too.
sound like At the Gates or whatever, and trying to say, oh no, they borrow from, say, Swedish death metal with a particular guitar tone or approach to D-beat punk or whatever, but they've mixed it with some other kind of current of tradition.
Right.
But I think, whilst that's not disparaging, and as Jason pointed out, it is utilitarian in that as a reviewer, you can immediately say something and the reader will know, oh, right, that band sounds like this, because,
Right.
I know what that sounds like. But I think we kind of forget, and metal is particularly guilty of this, in that it is kind of obsessed with its own lineage and its own history in a lot of ways.
Yep.
We kind of forget that it didn't used to be normal to refer to bands through their influences. You would obviously say, oh, they listen to Slayer or whatever,
Right.
but it would be very more sort of descriptive and very much more diving into what the identity of the band is.
Well, that's
released. Sorry, go on.
Oh, so I was gonna say that's what I'm getting at is right there, is that because I, as someone who reviews music as well, I make an active effort not to spend too much of my review comparing bands to other bands. So I will obviously mention it at the start of the review because that's how you get the reader to, oh, okay, this is what they're going to sound like. So say like, okay, this band sound, obvious influence from Morbid Angel, vocalist sounds like blah blah, but then you move on and then you actually focus on what that band is doing that actually makes them worth writing about. But I've seen a lot of reviewers online who basically the whole point of their review is just making comparisons, and like that's lazy journalism in my opinion. And
Well,
it's not.
it also, at that point, it becomes like showing off. Look how many bands I can spot in this album. Look how much I know about the history of death metal or whatever. And whilst it's important as a reviewer to know your onions as far as like what you're reviewing, it just becomes you naming bands that you think this band sounds like.
Right.
And to some extent, that's just, it is a bit self-indulgent. And also you need to pay respect to the artwork that you're reviewing.
Right.
For me, like there's a difference between bands that are clearly drawing on the influences of the past and they're, representing a continuity with it.
Yes.
And then there are bands that try to actively break with it. And the reviews that get me really excited are kind of an intersection of the two, in that they are clearly drawing on a tradition that I love, in whatever field it is, whether it's, classic death metal or Norwegian black metal or grindcore or whatever.
Right.
They're also adding something that's so novel and so unexpected that I actually struggle to find the vocabulary to describe it. And those are the releases that really get me excited. Is like, I literally don't know where to situate this. I don't know where to place it to describe it to someone else. And that means there's something going on here that I need to pay attention to and give it several more listens before I can actually write something down. And those are the releases that really sort of get me going as far as like a critic goes.
Me too. So the other side of the question I was going to ask is, as these legacy bands slowly age out of performing, pass away, break up, that sort of thing, do you think there'll be a wave of new bands that become legacy bands, or do you think it's sort of metal's like so rooted in that past that there'll never be another wave of bands as popular and famous as these current legends?
So, in my opinion, I think we are heading towards the decentralization that Jason was referring to earlier. And I think this has been a long time coming, and the internet is probably the main factor here. And you see this across all arms of culture, not just metal. But the internet has kind of destroyed primetime viewing on TV. It's destroyed kind of mass culture that we were familiar with in the late 20th century in a lot of ways. And this is kind of why you've got a huge burst of nostalgia over the last, 10, 15 years across films, across music, across TV, across popular culture in general. And old school death metal is just kind of one particular arm of that. And I think as the older acts eventually do, as you say, like break up or retire or pass away or whatever, it will still take a monumental effort to kind of fill the zeitgeist with anything else, because your Kisses and your Metallicas and Black Sabbaths will leave such a gaping hole. But I think metal is already undergoing this process of decentralization in that there are lots of local scenes, there are lots of semi-local scenes that kind of reach, regional or national kind of fame. But it's been a long time since a band broke out that could headline, a Hellfest or a Bloodstock in the UK or a Wacken that didn't form in the last 30 or 40 years. Like, I think Mastodon, and they're quite old now, they're not a new band, but I think they're one of the more recent bands that could compete as far as popularity and headline a major festival. Whereas when you think in the 1990s, in the early 90s, it would be odd to see someone like Motley Crue headline a big metal festival, even though Motley Crue had only been going, not much longer than 10 years at that point. They wouldn't be considered old by today's standards.
Right.
But by the 1990s, culture had moved on from the 80s. Hair metal was dead. Like, things were moving on. Culture moved at a much faster pace back then. And now it just seems much more homogenous and weird. And I think, sorry, to answer your question, that was quite a sort of bit of a tangent. To answer your question,
great answer.
I think we are moving towards that. And I think it will be a long time before a metal band grabs the zeitgeist in the same way that a Metallica did, in terms of literally the infrastructure that surrounds them, the money that they can make, the pull that they will have at a festival or, a major world tour or whatever.
Right.
It'll be a long time. I mean, Ghost, again, is probably one of the few exceptions that proves the rule. But generally speaking, we'll see much more dotted, local scenes that thrive, but you don't see, a band break out in the same way that they used to in the past. These local scenes will be very, as Jason said, anarchic. They'll thrive on their own, and they'll have this churn of fan-led kind of support, in that fans will still part with their cash and they'll still come to gigs, but it won't be on the scale that allows these bands to quit their day jobs and tour the world. So it depends what you mean by kind of the culture surviving. Because for me, as a reviewer and someone that wants to see metal reach the standards of artistry that I know it can, that to me sounds great, because it means we'll get this plethora and plurality of creativity going on. But obviously, you do need the commercial aspect if these bands are to export their art across the world. You do need money behind it. And I don't think we'll see that in the near future once kind of the older bands from the 70s, 80s, and 90s finally sort of throw in the towel.
Right.
Yeah, legacy.
Yeah, I mean,
legacy bands. The reason why I use that term legacy for that episode is because it's a loaded term. So you have legacy systems, and it means they're essentially obsolete. They're old and they need to be upgraded. You have legacy wealth. So it's generations prior that laid the foundation for wealth. Call that legacy wealth. And I use the same type of mentality with legacy bands. So I do believe a lot of them have already overstayed their welcome, but like you're talking about, we kind of deify these bands, and doing so, we make them stay in the game, longer than, perhaps they're welcome to be, because a lot of these bands, they just churn out records just to fucking tour and sling merch. That's essentially it. They're saving up for their retirements. So I definitely wanted to clarify on our usage of legacy, quote unquote. It's not, it's like, whoa, these guys are legendary. There's this huge legacy behind them and all that. No, it's a loaded term. And it means like they're old dogs who can't learn new tricks. So I wanted to clarify on that. And I do view, like Shelley was saying, that we probably won't ever see metal reach the heights that it has attained in the past, but that's also a good thing. We don't want metal to be mainstream. We want metal to be, extreme. And doing so it shouldn't, cater to the general population, because most people view music as a form of personal expression. They're like adornment, like decoration for the personalities. They don't really have the fanatical nature as extreme metal people have. So, where it's very personal to them, and it's part of their own essence, essentially. So, the great subculture of extreme metal, for instance, where everyone's wearing black T-shirts because that's expected of them, because they're so immersed into the aesthetic. So, just wanted to
The
chime in
nightmare
on the
scenario for
legacy
me.
part.
Sorry, Jason. The nightmare scenario for me. So I saw Black Sabbath back in 2017 in Leeds, and fantastic gig, and it was the first time I saw Black Sabbath, and I was thrilled to have the opportunity. But it was also like, one of those moments where it's like, man, Ozzy is old. And the nightmare scenario for me is that Dio world tour after he passed away, where it's his hologram. And
Oh,
again, I'm sort of like, and they do the same with ABBA and things like that, even though ABBA aren't dead yet. But it's like, are these people ever going to go away? Are we ever going to get over the shadow of some of these legendary acts that kind of overshadow culture, as it were? And yeah, it's probably a bit of low-hanging fruit to comment on the dystopian kind of angle of it, but also it is really fucking dystopian to me. And I'm just like,
yeah.
there's so many. It's like, for me, it's like a corporation where the older employees aren't retiring, and they're keeping the younger staff down from getting their promotions or whatever. They're occupying the jobs that should be, everyone should be moving up the ladder
And they're
of
less
like progression.
productive. They're less productive. They take long lunches, and they roll in late
Yeah.
and leave early.
Can't
So
use
they're not
software
good for the
properly, don't know how to use a
organization.
computer right.
Yeah, it's basically the analogy I use is these bands, not that they're actively holding down younger bands. The system, the process of gigging and PR and touring is, but at the same time, that's literally what's going on. Is there are so many fantastic local younger bands out there who are doing really unique things, but they're not getting that audience because there is this homogenous blob of late 20th century culture that's just not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, no, great answer. So here's a slightly, I mean, this will probably be the last topic because we're almost out of time, but what are your thoughts on AI music? Do you see it as something that's a useful tool, or do you see it as something that's dangerous to artistry itself?
So I heard your podcast with Brian Malone, and you posed the same question to him. And that was essentially, they view it as, like you should use every weapon in your arsenal, essentially, to refine your own expression. And I kind of disagree with that. With the Garden Gnome, I do not use AI. I may have used an arpeggiator here and there, just because I'm lazy. But with that, I program the scales that the arpeggiator is going to be utilizing and all that, so it's more authentic than having just like AI create the music for you. But I've heard like Beethoven's 10th or whatever try to be completed by AI, and it completely drops the ball. Like there's an artificial aspect to artificial intelligence, obviously, but where it doesn't capture the soul of what it's generating. And I do use AI imaging for the Garden Gnome, and that's just a utility, essentially, because I do not want to pay an artist to come up with the stupid gnome covers that I'm utilizing. I'll just plug it into AI, and I'll manipulate, like on a medieval gnome fornication. I told AI to have gnomes give each other the Heimlich maneuver, so it looks like they're having butt sex. So, there is some creative ways you can, try to work around the limitations of AI, because obviously you can't tell AI, hey, create gnomes having butt sex, and there's so many filters in place where it won't allow you to do that. But you can tell it to, hey, have gnomes do the Heimlich maneuver on each other, and it kind of looks like they're having butt sex. So, but yeah, when it comes to there's still like an artificial nature to the covers, and I do try to spruce it up, like with the communist Garden Gnome album. I did the sickle and hammer really makes that image a lot better, and I just threw that on top of the gnome image that AI had created. But when it comes to music, we're not there yet with it being authentic. Not in classical music. I've heard a lot of AI generated classical music, and there's nothing to it. It knows chords and scales and can kind of dissect what the theory behind some of the compositions, but when it tries to recreate it, it's missing the human soul. Um, but yeah, you can use AI as like any reference essentially, but it should not be the expression in itself. That's my opinion on that.
Well, my 2 cents, it's coming at it from sort of the economic angle. Like when commercial interests kind of lost interest in metal after the early 1990s, metal sustained itself and it's still going really strong today because there's like a population of metal that just keeps it going. We spend so much of our spare time. I mean, we're talking on a podcast in our free time to kind of discuss the culture and engage with the community. Bands like gigging, booking agents, musicians, bloggers, podcasters, whatever. We all basically volunteer our labor for this, and we volunteer our money. I spend a lot of money on new releases and stuff because I want to hear music that's made by people. And it kind of comes back to that point we were making about Dungeon Synth as well. Is AI music might get to a point of sophistication where it is almost indiscernible, but that's not really going to put musicians out of business because they've been struggling. Like, there's not a decade gone by since about the 1920s when musicians haven't been struggling for some reason, whether it's radio, whether it's cassettes, whether it's recorded music, whether it's record companies exploiting them. There's always going to be a decade where musicians are exploited for one reason or another. But there's always going to be these underground communities that give what they can and support each other. And I think metal is one of those, which is sort of stands out in that regard, in that everyone is involved in metal, is involved more than just a fan. They create something or produce something for the community as well, and it's a self-sustaining, self-perpetuating thing. And I think AI will find it really hard to invade those ecosystems because people want to hear something authentic. They want to hear something that's not just a product or not just background music. They want to hear an expression of artistic intent. And I think I don't want to predict the future because I'm not an AI expert, but I think metal will be one of the most resistant subcultures to AI for that very reason, because it is so focused on the expression of like something unique and so self-supporting that I think that it will just sort of immunize it against AI for much longer than other forms of music.
Do you think music has been overvalued, like in the 80s and 90s, where we were able to create, like the behemoth mega million airs that Metallica is? Do you think it was overvalued and now it's just kind of plateauing to where it should be?
I think what's happening, the mythos of the artist or the grand rock star has been overvalued. I think artistry is definitely undervalued. I think that should be a paid job just like any other, but it's not, because most artists have a day job. But I think the mythos of the rock star, the legend, the bacchanalian, intoxicated, whatever, that was definitely overvalued, and it kind of bought into the over-the-top culture of the 80s and 90s. And I think, as we said, we're still living with the legacy of that today. But I think AI is another interesting kind of challenge to what metal is. But I think metal does need to move away from that rock star kind of hierarchy and into a more egalitarian, anarchic kind of infrastructure.
Also, AI can only repackage what has already been done. So the algorithms, it can't create something truly new, because it doesn't have new as a reference. It has what has been pre-existing. Yes, you can experiment around, make, a jazz fusion, death metal rap project or something like that, and it can create some approximation of that. But when it comes to true general expression, something that is new and unique, AI is incapable of doing that because it's limited by the algorithms of the whatever it's referencing. So it can't reference something that doesn't exist yet. So There is
Right.
a limitation there as well. Um, and I have a little anecdote. I know we might run over a little bit, but we're talking about how, well, Shelley was talking about how some musicians are essentially exploited, and they're unable to make money, substantial amounts of money to live on. Um, that happened during the Great Depression of I think it was 1920s or 30s, around there. And my grandmother had remarried. Um, his name was Charlie Lamphere, and he was a jazz musician who played with Frank Sinatra, Mildred Bailey, and all that. But he lived through the Great Depression as a musician, and it was money, or music did not have any monetary value at all, because back then it was hard just for people to get food. Therefore music, there's no value to it when the times are tough, and he lived through that. And he said it was the hardest, point of his life, being a musician during the Great Depression. So a little chime in there. We haven't reached that level where, I still get the $1 donations on Bandcamp. So I'm making some money. But not, we're definitely not to the extent of where musicians were during the Great Depression. So just wanted to throw that little anecdote. It's not as bad as it could be. And honestly, we shouldn't be in music for money anyway. I know there are professional musicians that play in orchestras, and session musicians and bands, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that, they get really proficient at just playing music in general, not necessarily creating their own. But for the creator, I definitely like the model of how composers would, they would write their music, and in a lot of instances they never heard their symphonies performed during their lifetimes. So they wrote symphonies and that never got premiered. Or like Anton Bruckner, it premiered very late in his life, where he started gaining, mainstream appeal in Vienna. So he went the majority of his life, just refining his expression to such a great extent that by the time he started getting popular, he had so much great material that slowly started, making its way across the world. And I do like that model where you're forced to self-reflect and refine your own work, and, create music that has substantial meaning. That transports people beyond the crass bottom line of reality. So I do like the classical music model of the composer, that is always struggling, and because through struggle you're able to gain a lot of insight into yourself, through overcoming obstacles and all that. So I do like that model. Do you have anything else, James?
Yeah, just a final question that I ask everyone that comes on the show. I'll ask you both, but you can answer whatever order you prefer. It's a hypothetical. If you were stranded on a desert island and you only had a solar-powered Discman and 3 CDs to listen to on repeat until you got rescued, what would you want to have with you? It's tough, I'm sorry.
So 3 CDs, so you can't have like a double album or a symphony cycle or something like that?
Oh, as long as if it's a double album in the same cassette case, that's fine. Like, just 3 albums, I guess. Doesn't matter how many CDs between those.
That's a good question. So with metal, definitely, I would just choose the first A, the B, and the C of the Morbid Angel. I'll keep it simple. The Abominations of Desolation, Blessed Are the Sick, and Covenant.
Nice. Good choice.
All right, so I'm going to hit my 3 favorite genres. So, Tangerine Dream, Alpha Centauri, Sisters of Mercy, First, Last, and Always,
Nice.
and Burzum, Vislicet Tartarus. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, guys. That's fine. Awesome. Okay, I have one final question. This one's super easy. If people want to check out the website, listen to the podcast, follow on socials, what are the best places to do that for both Hate Meditations and Necropolis?
Literally, hatemeditations.com for the blog, and YouTube. The channel's also called Hate Meditations. Spotify. I think it's just Necropolis Podcast. Is it, Jason?
Yeah, it's just called Necropolis on Spotify and Apple Music and all the other podcast platforms.
Awesome. Well,
That's it. Simple as.
There you go. Thank you so much for coming on the show to both of you. It's honestly been a really interesting conversation. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, James, and all the best. And hope the cave dweller music gains more prominence. It's been interesting watching it evolve over the years. So it sounds like you have a lot on your plate, a lot of different projects, and it's great to see you excelling at each of them. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Have a great day. And for everyone listening at home, just tune in next time. We'll have another guest for you.